The Unraveling Questions. The story begins in a quiet corner of a small town, where Pastor Michael Rivers had spent over 2 decades preaching from the pulpit. Known for his charisma, warmth, and deep connection with his congregation, Pastor Rivers led a vibrant, tight-knit community that gathered every Sunday, their faith anchored in his passionate sermons and spiritual leadership. His church was more than a place of worship. It was a refuge, a family, a home for the broken and the faithful alike. But behind the scenes, something was quietly shifting, not in his message, but in his heart. It started subtly, a question here, a doubt there. Pastor Rivers was always a seeker, a thinker. A man who found joy in studying theology, parsing scripture, and diving into history. He had never been afraid of the hard questions, the ones that kept others awake at night. Questions about the Trinity, salvation, original sin, and the nature of God. For years, he had managed to reconcile the inconsistencies in doctrine with faith. But slowly, cracks began to appear in the foundation he had built his life on. He read widely, studied various Christian denominations, and even explored non-Christian faiths, not out of rebellion, but out of an insatiable hunger to understand God more deeply. He believed truth could withstand scrutiny, that any faith worth following should welcome questions, not suppress them. One day, during a sabbatical in a neighboring city, he attended an interfaith conference, a gathering that brought together voices from across the spiritual spectrum. There, he encountered an imam who spoke not with debate or argument, but with calm clarity, sharing the concept of tawhid, the uncompromising oneness of God in Islam. The words struck a deep chord, not because they were foreign, but because they felt familiar, like something he had always known but never had the language to express. That night, in his modest hotel room, Pastor Rivers opened a copy of the Qur'an he had picked up at the event. He expected something rigid, perhaps exotic, even distant. But what he found was startlingly intimate. It was not a book of strange rituals or unfamiliar gods. It was a divine conversation, a call to reason, a reminder of purpose. The stories of Jesus, Moses, Noah, and Abraham, men he had preached about countless times, were presented with reverence, consistency, and a powerful message of divine unity. He was stunned. The Jesus in the Qur'an was not denied. He was honored, described as a mighty messenger, born of a virgin, a word from God. The Virgin Mary was exalted as one of the purest women in all of creation, held in even higher esteem than many churches gave her. And what struck him most was the simplicity and power of Islam's message. Worship the one who created you, without partners, without intermediaries. He didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, but from awakening. In the weeks that followed, Pastor Rivers became consumed with study. He didn't abandon the Bible. He revisited it with new eyes. He compared verses, questioned translations, researched early church history, and began to see patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. He noticed inconsistencies in doctrine, particularly around the divinity of Jesus, the concept of inherited sin, and the evolution of the New Testament over centuries. He reached out to both Christian and Muslim scholars, engaging in long conversations, debates, and reflections. He asked the questions most are too afraid to voice. Why would God need to die? If Jesus prayed to God, who was he praying to? Where did Jesus himself claim divinity, in his own words? And slowly, with each dialogue, each revelation, the line between his old faith and the truth he was uncovering began to blur. It wasn't easy. Each new truth felt like a small betrayal, to his past, to the church he had built, to the identity he had carried for so long. But at the same time, there was peace. Deep, unshakable peace. The kind that doesn't come from answers alone, but from alignment with truth. The more he read, the more he prayed, not to the image he had once held in his mind, but to the Creator of the heavens and the earth, the more he realized he wasn't walking away from God. He was walking toward him. The moment of truth extended. Conflicted but driven by deep conviction, Pastor Rivers found himself living in a quiet spiritual tug-of-war. Each week, he stood before his congregation, delivering sermons filled with hope and moral guidance, but something inside him was shifting. His mind and heart were gradually aligning with a truth he had discovered beyond the stained-glass windows and wooden cross. He began to incorporate broader interfaith themes into his teachings. At first, it was subtle, references to unity in belief, the shared roots of Abrahamic faiths, and the importance of sincerity over sectarianism. His language changed. Words like the Creator started replacing the Father, and phrases like people of the book, found their way into his homilies. Some congregants noticed. A few raised eyebrows. Some whispered among themselves. But others leaned in, intrigued. There was a palpable shift in the air, not hostile, but curious. His messages were becoming less about church doctrine and more about universal truth, the kind that transcended titles and denominations. Then came the day that would change everything. On a quiet Sunday morning, instead of delivering his usual sermon, Pastor Rivers played a recorded recitation of Surah Maryam, the chapter of the Qur'an that honors Mary, Maryam, and recounts the miraculous birth of Jesus, Isa. The melodic Arabic verses filled the sanctuary, unfamiliar yet strangely calming. The reciter's voice echoed off the walls, and as the English translation followed, people listened with varying reactions, some with awe, others with confusion, and a few with visible discomfort. After the audio ended, Pastor Rivers stood at the podium, not with notes, but with sincerity. "I didn't play that to shock you," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "I played that because it moved me to my core. What you just heard is not an attack on our faith, but an extension of the very truths we hold dear, about Mary, about Jesus, about the one God." He paused, then shared his journey, how he had encountered the Qur'an at an interfaith event, how he read it out of curiosity, and how it stirred something in him that years of ministry hadn't fully awakened. He spoke of its simplicity, its uncompromising monotheism, its profound respect for Jesus as a prophet and Mary as a righteous woman. "I can no longer pretend," he said softly. "I found truth, clarity, and peace in the message of Islam. And I know this may sound impossible, maybe even offensive to some. But I didn't arrive here in rebellion. I arrived here in surrender." The silence that followed was deafening. He braced for backlash. And yes, a few congregants quietly stood and walked out, stunned or disillusioned. But what followed surprised him more. Several stayed seated, tears in their eyes, processing what they had just heard. The tension didn't explode. It softened. Some approached him after the service with questions. Others returned home that day with a strange mix of wonder and uncertainty. In the weeks that followed, private conversations unfolded. Congregants met with Pastor Rivers one-on-one. Some were angry. Some were skeptical. But many were simply curious, not ready to convert, but eager to understand what could cause someone they trusted for years to make such a profound shift. A core group, those who had long sought deeper understanding, began their own personal explorations of Islam. They didn't jump into anything blindly. They read books. They watched Islamic lectures and testimonies. They visited mosques. They asked local imams questions, often starting with, "My pastor said." And slowly, what began as a ripple grew into a quiet, persistent wave. Over the next 6 months, the church that once echoed with gospel hymns was transformed. The hymns were replaced with the peaceful cadence of Adhan, the Islamic call to prayer. The pews were removed to make space for prayer rugs. The cross was respectfully taken down, not in rejection, but in understanding that it no longer represented their collective path. Pastor Rivers adopted the name Imam Michael, not as a rejection of his past, but as a continuation of his journey, from preacher to seeker to guide. He didn't force or persuade anyone. He simply lived by example, led with love, and let the truth speak for itself. And now, what was once a church had become a masjid, a place of unity, simplicity, and sincere worship. A new beginning, extended. Today, the building still stands, not as a church, but as a masjid. The familiar brick walls remain, the foundation untouched, but the purpose of the space has transformed entirely. The stained glass windows, once framing saints and biblical scenes, still glow with color when sunlight streams in. But now, that same light falls gently onto a clean, carpeted prayer hall where rows of worshippers bow in complete submission to Allah. What was once filled with pews and hymn books now holds the simplicity and serenity of Islamic prayer, just open space, unity in lines, and hearts focused on the divine. The grand pulpit that once elevated sermons has been replaced with a small, humble wooden stand, a ryle, cradling the Qur'an. There are no icons, no paintings, no statues. Just light, peace, and the sound of prayer echoing through the hall 5 times a day. Leading these prayers is the man once known as Pastor Michael Rivers, now Imam Michael. He walks into the masjid wearing a white thobe, his demeanor calm, his tone filled with compassion. Every Friday, the masjid fills for Jumu'ah prayer. His khutbahs, Once sermons filled with gospel fire, now carry the eloquence and balance of Islamic guidance. He speaks on topics of mercy, justice, family, and the oneness of God. But in his unique style, he often refers to both the Bible and the Qur'an, not to compare, but to connect. To build bridges for those still exploring. His background allows him to explain Islamic concepts in a language that resonates deeply with people coming from Christian traditions. His authenticity is his greatest strength. He doesn't shy away from his past. Instead, he embraces it as part of his journey, a stepping stone toward clarity. He tells his community, "My walk through Christianity wasn't a mistake. It was part of the path that led me to Islam." The transformation that began with one man's conviction has now become a movement. Dozens from his former congregation have embraced Islam, some wholeheartedly, some taking cautious steps. Elderly couples, youth who grew up in Sunday school, even a few former choir members, all now part of this evolving community, relearning faith with fresh eyes. Beyond them, new faces continue to walk through the doors. Muslims from surrounding towns who had no local masjid now have a spiritual home. Curious non-Muslims attend open house events, interfaith nights, and Friday lectures. The space that once served a single path has now become a sanctuary of knowledge, unity, and diversity, all under the banner of La ilaha illallah, there is no God but Allah. Imam Michael's story has traveled far beyond his town. It has been featured in local newspapers, Islamic media platforms, podcasts, and even on national interfaith panels. He is invited to speak at universities, religious symposiums, and community events, where his story is received not with controversy, but with respect. He never sensationalizes it. He reminds every audience that this isn't a tale of rebellion or conversion for the sake of shock value. It's a journey of love, he says, a search that led me to the most profound peace I've ever known. And as for his message to anyone listening, anywhere in the world, never be afraid to ask. Never be afraid to seek. Read with your own eyes. Pray with your own heart. Don't let fear or culture or pride be your blindfold. If your heart is truly open, the truth won't just answer, it will embrace you, reshape you, and lead you home. In that quiet town, what was once just a church building now echoes with Allahu Akbar. God is the greatest, and through it, the story of one man's transformation continues to inspire thousands.